Hello, and thank you very much for tuning in to the podcast series by the New Silk Road Project. I'm your host today, Charles Stevens, the founder of the New Silk Road Project. This series is dedicated to understanding and raising awareness of one of the most important development strategies of the 21st century, China's Belt and Road Initiative. The centerpiece of the New Silk Road Project, an initiative supported by JEEP, CSIS, Magellan Capital, the University of St. Andrews and Shira, was to travel the course of the Silk Road economic belt from London to Yiwu in eastern China, interviewing the key actors and academics along its course. We will have to apologize in advance for some of the tangential moments in this podcast series, and also the variable quality of audio footage. We do hope this series sheds important light into China's growing global presence and the significant changes taking place across Eurasia. Georgia is in the unique position in the region of having free trade agreements with the European Union, Turkey, and China. Vladmier Papava, the former finance minister for Georgia and currently an academic at the Rondeli Foundation, believes that Georgia can therefore become a stepping stone to Europe. He sees the Belt and Road Initiative as a geoeconomic project and also a way for China to overcome some of its internal difficulties. It is fitting, however, that this project, the Belt and Road Initiative, may also be a way for Georgia to overcome some of its own difficulties.
So, I am an economist. During 1994-2000, I was the Minister of Economy. And in 2004-2008, I was a member of Georgian Parliament. And despite of this political activity, I am a researcher. And that's why I was doing my research from the very beginning as I became a student of Tbilisi State University. So at Georgian Foundation for Strategic and International Studies, we have different projects researching different aspects of development of Georgia, the problems of Caucasus regional problems. And for Georgia, from the very beginning, it was very important to research the problems related with Silk Road, Great Silk Road. In 90s, it was a very well-known project, European project, Traseka and Inogate. And both projects really are implemented, and both projects are operational. And later, a couple of years ago, Dezan, the president of China People's Republic of China, he decided to establish new project, One Belt, One Road, or Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. And it's a continuation of this Silk Road project, which we started to research from the 90s. That's why it's a huge interest of Georgia, Georgian government, Georgian scholars, students, because for any country in the world, it's very important to have some international economic function. And if you look on the global map, all countries have quite visible international functions. Some of them have such functions because of size, some others because they are quite rich with hydrocarbon resources. For Georgia, it's very important. Georgia is a very small country located between Russia and Turkey. Georgia population, a little bit more than 3.7 million population. And Georgia, unfortunately, is not rich with different natural resources. We will have some hydrocarbon resources, but the amount of these resources are so small that it cannot be seriously taken into account.
And you mentioned Trasica a second ago. Do you see any elements of divergence between the Silk Road Economic Belt, specifically the Central Asia, West Asia corridor, and Trasica?
Yes, why not? First of all, but there are some differences as well. What is similarity? First of all, both projects, Trasica and Silk Road Economic Belt, they use crossing the same way, and participants from different participants of this project, different countries are the same. So it's a similarity. But what's the difference? Difference is that Trasica was initiated from the west, and Silk Road Economic Belt is a part of Belt and Road Initiative coming from Beijing, from east. Another difference is Trasica is transport corridor, only transport corridor. Silk Road Economic Belt is more complicated. It's not only transport corridor. It means that in this transport corridor, also this project will promote some economic activities in different industries. So it's a serious difference. And third difference is that Trasica finished in Central Asia. The last point of Trasica is Central Asia, not reaching China. Now, when we discuss Silk Road Economic Belt, it's a little bit strange that Trasica did not consider to reach to China. But Silk Road Economic Belt, starting from China, crossing Central Asian countries, and East-West corridor also located in the Caucasus, in Georgia as well. So it's more complicated and more interesting for participants to have its own role in the development of Silk Road Economic Belt.
And you've written about the importance of both transport and economic corridors in galvanizing the Georgian economy. Could you pinpoint specific aspects or sectors or industries which you think would benefit the most from this involvement?
It's a really very interesting question. Unfortunately, Georgian economy has a lot of problems. First of all, Georgian economy, the main problem for Georgian economy is that real sector of economy is very undeveloped. And mostly Georgia implemented consumerist model of economic development, which is a huge mistake. For giving some indicators like that imports 3.5 times more than exports. In consumer basket or food basket, the share of imported goods is nearly 80%. Only 20% we produce by ourselves. So Georgia is mostly consumerist model of economy. But another question, how we manage to consume 3-4 times more than produce. So the answer on this question is very simple, because many Georgians left Georgia from the very beginning of our independence. Some of them left Georgia because of war in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, because of economic difficulties. Many of them are living in neighbor countries like Russia, and they sent the parts of their earnings to their relatives. And so the role of remittances in consumerist model of economic development is very, very significant. That's why Silk Road Economic Belt gives to Georgia new chance to develop real sector of economy. And for explaining why, I have to recall two very important agreements. First of all, Georgia already signed and has agreement of free trade regime with European Union. And Georgia is a single country in the region having such type agreement. In May 2017, Georgia also managed to sign free trade agreement with China. So it promotes Georgia's situation in the region, because Georgia is a single country having free trade agreement with European Union, China, and Turkey as well. Three major players in the region. So, and what it means, for example, discussions about free trade regime between European Union and China is still, they still discuss the problem having this free trade regime. So, but you know that real politics, economic development needs some actions. So Chinese or European businessmen cannot wait to reach some agreement between Brussels and Beijing. That's why for them, for example, for Chinese business, it's very complicated to reach European markets. But having free trade agreement with Georgia and with European Union is promote Chinese investors to make investments in Georgia and, for example, to produce Chinese goods in Georgia. And label will be not produced in China, but produced in Georgia, which means that these goods will have free access to European markets. And the same situation, vice versa. If European businessmen will have some interest to reach Chinese markets, for them it's much easier to start their production in Georgia, having free trade agreement with China and sending European goods with label produced in Georgia. Both versions promote development of Georgia's real economy, and to change the model of this consumerist model, to change on a model of economic development which will be based on production. For example, our south neighbor, Turkey, they have a more economic model which is based on production. They are producers. And Georgians are mostly consumers, which is a pity story of my country.
And you mentioned Russia, and Russia is also based on a consumer model of economy. They have the more established new Eurasian land.
So, excuse me to interrupt you. Yes, I agree that Russia has consumerist model of economy, but Russian experts, Russian researchers, they are against all this. So this interpretation. When in 2015 I published an article in Moscow, then later this article appeared in the United States in English, they were very unhappy, because when I compared economic models of Georgia and Russia, and their position was it's impossible because of the size of the countries. But size of countries is not a matter changing the situation in the model, because Russian economy is mostly based on exports of hydrocarbon resources. And if you exclude this influence of exporting of hydrocarbon resources, then you have really only consumerist model of Russia's economic development. That's why I fully agree with your evaluation.
Hopefully that you may agree with my next question, that this more established corridor is one which could be seen as either an alternative or a competitor to the Silk Road economic belt, specifically the Central Asia, West Asia corridor. Am I too extreme to call it a competitor, or do you think an alternative is more appropriate?
So it's really a very interesting question. It's a question for researchers. Why? Because at present we don't have any response from Russia about Silk Road economic belt, but we have not positive history of our relations with Russia. When Traseka inaugurated these projects were implemented, Russia was the main actor against the implementation of the realization of these projects. And Russia did everything to create barriers for Georgia in participation of Traseka. So, at the same time, we have to take into account that Russia already initiated and created Eurasian Economic Union. It's a Russian model. And now Georgia faced some difficulties because two countries of this Eurasian Economic Union are neighbor countries for Georgia. From northern side is Russia, from southern side is Armenia. Armenia, it's pity story that Moscow called Armenia as outpost of Russia. And as I know from my Armenian colleagues that they are very unhappy to have such a type of label because for them it's more important if foreigners will look on Armenia as an independent state and not as an outpost of Russia. But really they are really an outpost of Russia because they controlled 20% of Azerbaijani territory in Nagorno-Karabakh, and without support of Russian military troops and without political support from Kremlin, for Armenians it will be impossible to maintain their position in controlling Azerbaijani territories. So that's why for Georgia it's a really complicated situation. Another aspect of the problem is Armenia, unfortunately, does not have its own economy. All Armenia's more or less large enterprises now are controlled by Russian companies. It started from 2002, and slowly, step by step, Russian huge companies, they are controlling Armenian enterprises. That's why Armenia's economy is a part of Russia's economy. But it's impossible any progress in unification of these economies because they don't have direct borders. And Georgia is besides Armenia and Russia. That's why for Moscow it's very important to control Georgia as well. And then unification with Armenia will be very simple step. So for Armenia, it's also very important. We try to have very good relations with all our neighbors and with our historical brothers, Armenians.
And looking at good relations between countries at the moment, Georgia's role is functioning primarily as a transportation corridor from east to west. What challenges do you see as Georgia tries to become an economic center, an economic hub in its own right? So
it's a really very important question. Yes, Georgia's goal to create economic hub. Why? Because Silk Road economic belt, as I have mentioned, is not only transport corridor, it's economic corridor, which promote activities in different sectors of economy. And it's very important. And having free trade agreements with different neighbors is also very important, gives a possibility of creation of economic hub. Then we also have to take into account our strategic partnership with Azerbaijan and Turkey. You know that Azerbaijan and Turkey, they have the same nationality and they have the same language with quite few differences in their languages. And economic sense of our strategic partnership is based on transportation of Azerbaijani hydrocarbon resources to Turkey and then to western direction. You know that 3 different huge pipeline projects were already implemented, like Baku-Tbilisi Supsa oil pipeline, Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline and South Caucasus gas pipeline connected Baku to Erzurum. So all these projects are already implemented. Now it's very important to have a railway connection of Azerbaijan to Turkey. And the railway connection, now you know that Kars-Halkalaki railway connection also is on the way. Now that's why I think that for Georgia it's very important to continue strategic partnership with Azerbaijan and Turkey, and it's promote Georgia to have more possibilities for development of different sectors in Georgia, different sectors of economy.
And one of the priorities for the government is investment in education and high-tech sectors, but the FDI into these areas is reasonably small.
It's a really very good question, but for me it's very difficult to tell you about the vision of my government. There are so many unqualified persons that they don't have any vision of the future of Georgia. What type of model, economic model, will be better for Georgia? I try to explain you. Fortunately for us, we have association agreement with European Union, which creates some framework for Georgia's economic activity. And Brussels promotes Georgia's rapprochement to European Union. But European Union itself does not have any unified economic model, any single model. You know that, for example, economic model in Finland or Cyprus is very different, or economic model in Denmark and Malta is very different, or Austria and Portugal. So, yes, the goal of Georgia and also Georgian government several times manifested that Georgia wants to be a part of Europe. Perfect. But Europe is different. European Union is very different models. So what will be the goal of Georgia? To be like Cyprus, like Malta, or like Austria. It's different models. And what's happened now in Georgia? The main industry promoted by Georgian government is only tourism. Tourism, Georgia is very touristic country, but promoted only tourism is mistake, huge mistake. Why? Because in our consumer basket and food basket, 80% are imported goods. What it means? Now you are staying in Georgia, in Tbilisi. Your consumer basket also include 80% of import goods. So from $100 you will spend in Georgia, only $20 will be used in Georgia. $80 will go for imports, which means that orientation of Georgian government promoting only import tourism is based on promoting of imports. And I want to remember you different cases like Switzerland, France, Italy, Great Britain, United States. All these countries are touristic countries, but not only touristic countries. For example, Greece is only touristic countries with economic difficulties. So, yes, we have some programs, startup programs promoted by Georgian government. Sometimes they make statements that they will promote development of business based on innovations. So, okay. But mostly they are focused on promoting tourism.
And when we were in Anaklia, one of the things that we learned was the importance of light industry to its development. do you...
Light industry.
Light industries.
Yes.
Are there any international companies that you think could be interested in getting involved?
So, again, it's a very important question. Georgia is a small-size economy. Georgia cannot be attractive because of its size. And because of difficulties in the Caucasus, you know that conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, it's also impossible to have a situation when all South Caucasus market will have relations without any restrictions. Yes, we have free trade regime with Armenia, free trade regime with Azerbaijan, but Azerbaijan and Armenia, because of conflict, they don't have any trade relations. Because of small size of Georgia, how we can resolve the problem? Because small size of Georgia creates barriers for Georgia's economic development. How we can resolve this problem? Only using our location, geo-economic location, Silk Road economic belt, Silk Road transport corridor will promote Georgia that if something will be produced in Georgia, then using this transport corridor, it can be exported in different countries. And having free trade regimes with main partners, with main economic partners for Georgia, also promote development of economy and resolve the problem related with small-scale economy.
And you've already touched on this, but if you're happy to elaborate a little bit further on possible collaborations between the Belt and Road Initiative and the Greater Eurasian Union, is this something that's going to be possible with...
No, nothing is possible. Nothing. I think it's nothing. Why? I try to explain why. Because Eurasian Economic Union is an economic union only in the title. But really it's a political union. And the Russian government is ready to have some losses, economic losses, and only this leverage promote Kremlin to control this Eurasian Economic Union. Then the position of Moscow, position of Russia. Russia, if you compare with Armenia, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, is several times more its economy than these small countries. Kazakhstan, little bit bigger player economic, but again Russia's economy is much more. And Russia will never allow the members of the Eurasian Economic Union to have the same influence in the union as it has now Moscow. It's our history based on our Soviet past. But what is the Silk Road economic belt? I don't know what will be tomorrow. What will be the position of Xi Jinping or Beijing? But at present, it's a quite flexible framework of relations. No, nothing like orders come from Beijing. So it's a framework. It's a framework of economic collaboration, of economic cooperation, when all partners can realize their interests, economic interests. That's why at this stage there is a huge difference in models of Eurasian Economic Union or Great Eurasian Partnership. Because Great Eurasian Partnership also will be, under the Moscow's goal is to have some control. You know that the concept of Eurasianism, which was established in the beginning of 20th century in Russia, is based on main role of Russia in Eurasia, when Russia has to control all neighbors, close neighbors, far neighbors, and to be a leading country in Eurasia. China, the goal is different, but at present. So, and what is strange for me, but at the same time interesting as for researcher, that there is no any concept of Chinese-style Eurasianism. But now some Chinese and not only Chinese researchers started publications of papers about Chinese style of Eurasianism. I don't know what it means.
And so you can't postulate any possible implications for this for Eurasia. Possible implications or consequences of this new style of Eurasianism.
I think that before this new style of Eurasianism is coming from China, we will not have any concept. It's very complicated to discuss. I, by myself, I cannot write something promoting Chinese Eurasianism because it's against of my visions, and I am not a Chinese researcher. So, but it's dependent on China. China itself has its own serious problems because Chinese economy is not a simple economy. There are a lot of zombie companies, high-tech companies, large-scale economy. So China itself has many difficulties, and I think that this idea to promoting Belt and Road Initiative is one of the ideas how to overcome from these difficulties, because China needs new markets, China needs new economic contacts, and Silk Road Economic Belt and Road Initiative will promote China to do it. But now for me it's very important to have some transparent role of the United States. And nobody knows what's the position. Because what's now happened in the United States, having President Trump's administration, many things are very untransparent. I don't know, for example, a couple of days ago, it was made very important for Georgia's statement that American government is ready to start negotiations with Georgia to signing free trade agreement. So Georgia's really need free trade agreement with the United States. But I am not sure that it will be possible during Trump's administration because he's against of any trade liberalization.
I think this touches on a really important point, and in one of your papers I read that you published last year, you talk about the Belt and Road Initiative primarily as an economic project, and that was before the takeover by the Chinese on the 99-year lease of the Habitota port in Sri Lanka. Do these sorts of actions suggest there may be more geopolitical aspects of the initiative?
I think that at present it's more geoeconomic project. But geoeconomics is not far from geopolitics. So maybe later, I don't know when, 5 years later, 10 years later, maybe tomorrow, this geoeconomic project will change its face and will look like more geopolitical project. But first it has to be established as a geoeconomic project. For example, let's look on the European Union. Integration was started in economy. It was economic integration. And until present date, it's more economic integrated space than politically integrated space, European Union. At least you remember that the European Union did not manage to have a single constitution. But it was a huge projection, so it's not unified. It's more economic integration rather than political. So now about ambitions of Beijing. Yes, it's a huge country, huge amount of population. Yes, I'm sure that they will have some ambitions to have some political influence, but is it possible to have political influence of Beijing on Georgia? I think that there is not a serious threat for Georgia than political influence from Russia. Why? First of all, cultural component. knowledge of language. So Georgians still remember Russian language. We have young generations, they don't know Russian. But people like me, little bit younger, all of them, they know Russian language. Relatives of Georgia, many Georgian families, the relatives are living in Russian. Then Russian language is used in our communications with our neighbor countries like Azerbaijan, Armenia, Ukraine, Belarus, or Central Asian countries as well. So, and then religious, Orthodox Church in Russia, Orthodox Church in Georgia. So, influence of Russia is more significant. And what type of influence can come from China? I don't know. And main barrier will be language. Language, writing. So, and I think it's a barrier not only for China-Georgian relations, but worldwide.
And touching on these more tangible, intangible aspects of the Belt and Road Initiative and the soft infrastructure that's being built, what level of cultural exchanges and educational cooperation are you seeing between Georgia and China?
So it's an interesting question because there is no huge projects, but there are some initial stage of cooperation in the educational system. For example, there are some interesting universities in China, and they offer to Georgia students services in studying high tech. So, but education is in English, not in Chinese, because it's knowledge of Chinese language and it's very complicated. But there is not some huge projects of cooperation between our universities, but it's on the initial stage.
And from your position primarily as a researcher, how have perspectives and also awareness changed of the Belt and Road Initiative and also in China, in Georgia?
Excuse me.
So the Belt and Road Initiative is now around 5 years old.
Yes.
And is playing an increasing role in Georgia. How is this changing perceptions of China, and what is the awareness?
So, yes, it's 5 years old, but free trade regime, Georgia-China free trade regime is only, this agreement only 1 year old. So without having such free trade regimes, only Silk Road Economic Belt cannot promote many activities. So there is a problem of mentality of Georgian businessmen. Why? In 1999, Georgia became a member of WTO. And later, Georgian businessmen, they arise the question. So, why Georgia joined WTO? What was the goal? WTO gave nothing to us. Yes, WTO is an organization. It's promote you to open the door. And then you have to use this open door for having your business activities. So the same in having free trade agreement with China. It opens the door for free trade relations or free trade relations with the European Union. But for example, European Union needs high quality standards of goods. So it means that Georgia producers has to produce much better quality of the goods, to have some certificates of these standards. The same in China direction. And I think that it should be main type of activity of Georgian government promoting Georgia's economic development based on free trade regimes with European Union and China.
And as one of the final points that would be good to touch on, what do you see as being the single greatest challenge to the Belt and Road Initiative over the next 5 years?
So I think it's really a serious question because it's a very complicated issue because, as I know, at present, Brussels are not so optimistic. Washington, the same situation. India is really against of it because I participated in different international conferences and the most criticism comes from India. Brussels and Washington, they are on a position not to criticize, but to a position of waiting. So it's very complicated to have any forecast of what will happen after 5 years. But for Georgia, it's very important not to wait for these 5 years, but to start activities, to promote implementation of different business projects in Georgia, Chinese-style projects, European-style projects, Turkish-style projects, using these free trade agreements with all different sides. Finally, I want to tell you one joke. In the beginning of the 90s, when Georgia became an independent state, and when I met with my foreign colleagues, and the question was about my country, and I told that I am from Georgia, the understanding that I am from Georgia, from United States. And it was very complicated to explain what means Georgia. The Georgian is an independent country. And I recall such persons like Stalin, Shevardnadze, and sometimes it did not help. Then I tried to move to geography and explain that. Do you know Russia? Yeah. Do you know Turkey? Okay. Georgia is between Russia and Turkey. And you know, it looks like a geopolitical hot dog. And you know that sweet part of hot dog, tasty part of hot dog is in the middle. Georgia is in the middle.
And on that note, if you were going to use one word to summarize the Belt and Road Initiative, what is that word for you?
I think that for Georgia it's very important to use all possibilities coming from different neighbors, all possibilities for economic development. As I have mentioned, we have our strategic partner in the region is Azerbaijan and then Turkey. We have very good relations with our historical brothers, Armenians, and we try not to spoil more our relations with Russia. But Georgia's position is very difficult because Russia has already occupied 20% of Georgia's territory. So Georgia's geopolitical position is very complicated, but geoeconomic position is very promising. So I hope using different initiatives like BRI will promote Georgia's economic development.
And if I can squeeze you for one single word of what the Belt and Road Initiative is to you, what would that word be?
So it's not an easy question, but I think that one word should be optimism.